Russia and China may be quietly helping Iran lock onto U.S. and Israeli targets in the Middle East. That's the allegation driving this story, and it can't be dismissed as paranoid rumor. At the same time, it's important to be clear, what follows is a synthesis of public reporting, behavioral signals, and official statements, not a court of record. Multiple indicators suggest a pattern. Whether they amount to direct, state-sponsored targeting assistance remains, for now, alleged and under investigation. The timeline matters because it shows how fast this concern moved from rumor to a subject of public briefings. The conflict that exploded on February 28, 2026, set off a cascade of strikes and counterstrikes across the region. By early March, public statements from Moscow denied direct involvement, yet on March 10th, and in the days that followed, congressional and executive branch conversations shifted tone. A Senate briefing was reportedly held in which lawmakers were told classified assessments pointed to external assistance that materially improved Iran's targeting. Around the same window, Planet Labs, a major commercial satellite imagery provider, temporarily restricted access to some imagery over the region, a move officials and analysts flagged as unusual. Separately, public comments from U.S. political leaders suggested a belief that outside powers could be playing a role, even if Washington has been cautious about airing accusations in full. These pieces don't prove a single, coordinated plot. They do, however, form an accumulation of signals worth parsing. To make sense of what help might look like, it helps to divide the assistance into three technical buckets, each of which would have different operational effects and different political implications. First is space-based imagery and commercial remote sensing. Second is signals and electronic intelligence, commonly shortened to SIGINT and ELINT. Third is the compilation of order of battle information, logistics and technical training that turns raw data into usable strike plans. I'll unpack each at a level intended for non-specialists while avoiding operational specifics. Commercial and government satellite imagery can provide near real-time visibility of where ships, aircraft, and ground units are positioned, where bases are being supplied, and when assets move. In recent years, commercial providers have closed much of the imagery gap that once separated state actors and smaller regional players. If a foreign power were, allegedly, sharing more frequent or higher-resolution imagery, or if it were enabling access to imagery that Iran would otherwise not see, that would shrink the time it takes to detect and verify a target's location. Planet Labs' decision to delay certain imagery access is significant less for any single image, and more as a signal. When commercial imagery flows are restricted or rerouted, it changes who can see what and when. What is known? Access controls and commercial policy shifts can materially affect situational awareness. What is inferred? Outside actors that can supply or broker enhanced imagery would accelerate Iran's ability to plan strikes. SIGINT and ELINT are the second bucket. SIGINT, signals intelligence, broadly refers to intercepting communications and transmitted data. ELINT, electronic intelligence, focuses on non-voice emissions, such as radar signatures. Together, they reveal the electronic footprint of defensive networks, where radars are active, how frequently they sweep, what frequencies are used, and where command and control links occur. If Iran were receiving, allegedly, ELINT, indicating which air defense radars are active and when, or SIGINT, that illuminates certain communications patterns, it could reduce uncertainty about defensive postures and create more reliable windows of opportunity. That does not mean sharing specific coordinates of individual systems, rather it means changing the information landscape so defenders' patterns are more visible. What is known, ELINT and SIGINT are decisive force multipliers in modern conflicts. What is inferred, outside state capabilities in these domains could materially compress Iran's decision cycle by clarifying defender behavior. The third bucket is human and institutional order of battle, logistical mapping, and training. Order of battle is shorthand for a compiled account of what assets exist where, the types of aircraft, ships, air defense batteries, fuel nodes, and critical support infrastructure. Logistics and choke points tell you where an adversary is vulnerable because of supply lines or maintenance constraints. Training and technical advising teach operational forces how to fuse disparate intelligence streams into a coherent strike plan. If Tehran has allegedly received curated lists, maintenance schedules, or hands-on instruction that helps translate imagery and signals into an actionable plan that would meaningfully raise the precision and timing of strikes. What is known, compiled, human-curated intelligence and training multiplies the value of raw data. What is inferred? Assistance that pairs intelligence products with advisory support shortens the path from detection to strike. Put together, these three forms of support shorten what militaries call the kill chain, the sequence from initial detection through identification, targeting, and engagement. Imagine an attacker who previously had to peck at a target with limited visibility. Now imagine that attacker receiving a high-resolution map, a live feed indicating which defenses are active, and a guide for how to synchronize a multi-weapon attack. The result, if the allegations prove accurate, is not just one more missile landing somewhere, but a greater likelihood of synchronized, accurate strikes that can overwhelm defenses and increase damage to high-value assets. Again, this is a description of effect, not a manual for how to carry it out. There are behavioral signals consistent with this picture. Officials and lawmakers have referenced classified briefings and intelligence estimates in private and, selectively, in public. Commercial indicators, like the Planet Labs access decision, are observable in the open market. Political statements from Moscow and Beijing have been denials or equivocations. At the same time, some U.S. political figures have publicly suggested they believe external assistance to Iran is occurring. Taken together, those signals merit caution and close monitoring, but they also explain why policymakers are walking a diplomatic tightrope rather than launching headline-grabbing recriminations. Why would Washington publicly downplay or avoid a full-throated accusation of Russia or China? There are at least three prudent constraints informing that choice. First, escalation control. Pointing a finger at two nuclear-armed great powers risks an instant and dangerous broadening of the conflict. If the evidence is not ironclad, public accusations could quickly force adversaries into a defensive posture and reduce diplomatic breathing room. Second, strategic ambiguity. U.S. leadership may prefer to address suspicions with discreet intelligence sharing, sanctions, covert countermeasures, or back-channel warnings rather than an immediate public confrontation that could accelerate hostilities. Third, domestic and alliance management. Publicly accusing another great power requires allied coordination and evidentiary thresholds that are politically and technically complex. In short, the calculus favors containment and attribution carefully marshaled rather than dramatic public naming, at least until proof meets the threshold decision-makers require. The risks of the alleged assistance, however, are real. If Iran's strikes become more accurate and synchronized, U.S. and Israeli forces in the region face compressed reaction windows, higher attrition risk for fixed assets, and a greater chance of escalation from miscalculation. It also raises longer-term questions about how commercial space services are governed in conflict zones, how to harden or disperse critical assets, and what counterintelligence steps are feasible without triggering a wider confrontation. What should observers watch next? First, transparency moves. Any public release of corroborating intelligence or synchronized statements from U.S. allies would shift the scale of public confidence. Second, commercial behavior. Continued squeezing or rerouting of satellite imagery access or corroborating evidence from other commercial providers would strengthen the picture that space-based data flows are playing a role. Third, operational patterns. Changes in how Iran times and sequences attacks or sudden improvements in strike accuracy against previously resilient assets would be an operational indicator consistent with improved external assistance, though operational outcomes can result from many factors and do not alone prove outside involvement. There are also plausible countermeasures that do not require escalation, enhancing deception and camouflage, dispersing high-value assets, tightening emissions control and spectrum management, increasing ship and aircraft mobility, and bolstering allied intelligence sharing and commercial partnerships to restore situational awareness. Those steps are defensive and mitigation-oriented rather than retaliatory, and they reflect the kind of calibrated response one would expect if policymakers believe the allegations merit action without wanting to widen the war. To be blunt, the allegation that Russia and China are assisting Iran in ways that materially improve its ability to target U.S. and Israeli assets is serious and, if true, a strategic game-changer. If not true, however, misattribution could itself become a driver of escalation. That double risk explains the measured public posture we're seeing from Washington, enough concern to tighten briefings and restrict some commercial imagery flows, but not so much public certainty as to force a crisis between nuclear powers. What this means for civilians and for policy watchers is simple. Monitor the evidence stream, favor caution in interpretation, and watch for coordinated, multilateral public attribution as the marker that intelligence has reached a higher confidence level. The most practical takeaway is that the battlefield is changing. Commercial satellites, AI-enabled imagery processing, and sophisticated SIGINT, ELINT capabilities have democratized certain kinds of reconnaissance. That technological shift compresses decision cycles and raises both tactical risk and strategic complexity. If you want to follow this closely, I'll be tracking new disclosures, commercial imagery developments, and official statements as they emerge. Subscribe for updates. This is an unfolding story, and I'll post follow-ups as credible new information becomes available. For primary sources, links and a deeper dive into the technical terms I mentioned are in the description below. In the meantime, the responsible posture is to treat these claims as serious allegations that require rigorous verification, to press for transparent multilateral reporting where possible, and to support defensive measures that reduce vulnerability without needlessly escalating the conflict. The danger is real. The remedy must be measured.